Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Dairy Profit Seminars at Empire Farm Days for 2015. We expect to see more folks as the morning goes on. The attendance is always a mystery to us, and we do have great programs every day, every year, and we're glad to have you folks here to join us. A little bit of housekeeping. My name is Joel Hastings. I'm with Dairy Business Communications. My colleagues with us this morning are Cliff Passano, Randy Blodgett, our videographer and digital guy, and Debbie Morneau to my right. And we're very proud to co-present the Dairy Profit Seminars with the folks at the Pro Dairy organization at Cornell. And you'll be hearing more about that and more from them in just a moment. Caroline Potter is our primary contact, and she's the Pro Dairy instigator for us this week. And we're always fun to work with Caroline. We have a little bit of housekeeping to do, and each of you are welcome to have our gift packets there with information from our sponsors. If you're going to join us for lunch, please make sure that you complete this card. One per farm or per family is fine, but the card is your lunch ticket. And lunch will be served around noon. And it's a picnic style, and you're welcome to join us for lunch and enjoy the milk. Our milk this morning is provided by Upstate, and we appreciate that contribution very much. It's great stuff. And Miraco provides our high-tech cooler over here, a Miraco water, and that does a good job for us too. So the milk's ice cold, and thanks to Miraco and thanks to Upstate. We could not do any of this without our sponsors, and we have a good number of companies working with us this year. We're delighted about that. They feel the educational programs here are very much worth their support, and they're pleased to be involved. I'll introduce them just alphabetically. Ag Risk Management by Weller & Associates. The Sweetlands and Tom Weller are our contacts. I don't see them here this morning with us. ASAP Interiors, Arnie Chantel and Paul Garrett are at the booth just down the street. Cargill Animal Nutrition, we appreciate that help so much. DFA, Dairy Farmers of America, has been a longtime sponsor, and Lynette Sorbello is here this morning with DFA. And thank you, Lynette, for joining us, and thanks to DFA. Farm Credit East is another stalwart. Sarah Levy is here this morning with Farm Credit East. And we're delighted for their help and support. And do I see some colleagues here? Maybe Bethany and Allison, perhaps, or you'll have to help me. Thank you very much, Heather and Christy. Thanks to Farm Credit East. Farm Family Insurance, Casualty Insurance, is a sponsor. We appreciate that. Lalamond Animal Nutrition. Lincoln Financial Advisors back here in the corner, and they've got a part on the program on Thursday. Matthew Wright is with us from Lincoln Financial. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you to the company. Multimin USA is a sponsor. Pikeside Enterprises, and we appreciate the support of all those companies, and without them there would be no program and no lunch, so we thank them very much. We're going to get right into the program now. We've got some talented and high-quality presentations for you this morning. Kathy Barrett from Pro Dairy will be introducing our speakers, and I'd invite Kathy to join us right now. Kathy, thank you very much, and thanks again to all of you for being with us.
Thank you, Joel. So I'm Kathy Barrett. I'm with Cornell's Pro Dairy program, and I worked with Julie Berry and Caroline Potter on this morning's presentation. Over the last year or so, the Pro Dairy program has been really focusing on milk quality, both from the perspective of the traditional milk quality point of view, and then also from the perspective of components. And so as kind of a continuation of the efforts that we've been putting forward, we decided that today would be a good day to kind of look at the milk quality, talk about the economics, and then a bit about how to look at your system and in a totality and decide where you might put your efforts to increase your milk quality. So to that end, we asked Dr. Jessica Scillieri Smith and Dr. Rick Waters to present some of the key information that they've worked on and have presented through their roles with Quality Milk Promotion Services. So we're going to start out with Dr. Jess. She's going to talk to you about some of the economics. I think you'll be surprised at the economic impact beyond just your premiums that you get for milk quality. And so she's going to sort of set the stage for us. And Dr. Jess is particularly qualified to speak on this. She's a veterinarian, and she's also the director for Quality Milk Promotion Services in Northern New York. So she hauled herself down here just to speak with us to us this morning, which we greatly appreciate. So we're going to let her go ahead and start off with her presentation, then take a couple of minutes for questions, and then Dr. Rick Waters will finish off the rest of the morning. It's two excellent presentations, so I'm really glad that you were able to make it here this morning, and I think you'll find it very worthwhile for your time spent. Thank you. Here you go, Dr. Jess.
Oh, should I turn this one off? Okay. Okay, perfect. So I would certainly love to thank Pro Dairy for inviting both Dr. Waters and I to join you today. It's really a pleasure to be here. I always love to give a little bit about myself because I think listening to a speaker is a little bit more interesting if you kind of know their background and they seem more like a real person. It's just me. But I grew up in Los Angeles, so I'm not your typical dairy person. But I went to the University of Vermont for college, where I did a student-run dairy herd program, fell in love with cows, fell in love with dairy farming, and even though I'd already wanted to be a veterinarian, refocused my path to do something with dairy. I really wanted to be in a position where I could help dairy farmers be more profitable and produce the best quality food product that they could. And so after graduating from college and graduating from vet school, I did mixed animal practice for a couple of years, and then I joined Quality Milk up in Canton. I had already lived there, so it was geographically convenient for me. And now I can do exactly that. I can meet with farms and help them make decisions, make management decisions, and help them achieve their goals for producing quality milk. I'm also married to a dairy farmer, so I feel like when I sit down and meet with dairy farmers, I understand the challenges that they face as well as possible. I understand that you can't ask someone to build $100,000 barn in order to see a somatic cell count drop of 30,000, 40,000. It might not just make economic sense for them, and doing stuff within their means. So this is a presentation that I originally gave as part of a Northern New York Dairy Institute. It's a lecture series that Cooperative Extension does up in my region. 2 years ago, we focused on milk quality, and so I took a presentation that QMPS had already developed and modified it for that audience. Since then, as I said, Pro Dairy kind of started to focus on quality milk, and the lecture series that we had developed with Cooperative Extension got done across the state as well, and so we're gonna do it here today. I did try to modify it to meet the time constraints that we have today, but I did also add some examples at the end. If we have time to get to them, that's great. If we don't, it's fine. We won't miss out, but I thought it'd be cool to go through a real life example. So the main goal today is to look at the economics of milk quality besides the things that are obvious. It's really obvious when you treat a cow, you're spending money on tubes of intramammary treatment, you are spending time and labor on her, and her milk's not going in the tank, so there's that decrease in volume that you're selling. But and you're potentially not getting premiums. So those are kind of the obvious things, but there's a lot of other economic losses that a dairy farmer experiences when his milk quality or her milk quality is not where her goals are. And we're gonna try to go through and go into those in a little bit more depth. So certainly we all know that mastitis is amazingly expensive to the dairy industry in the United States. It ends up being close to $2 million, or $2 billion, excuse me, and ends up being about $200 per cow on average. So if you're milking 1,000 cows, that's a lot of money. If you're milking 100 cows, it's still a lot of money for you. And so whatever we can do to mitigate those losses is going to end up with more money in your pocket. So one of the things that I always like to focus on is, as I said, you can't always build a new barn, but when you're thinking about different strategies to combat or improve milk quality, you got to look at them as how much bang do you get for your buck. And so this is an example, a way to look at it, and all those X's on the slides are different approaches to milk quality, different strategies that you can impose: dry cow therapy, Orbicil, pre-dipping, all those different things that we kind of take for granted, but I will tell you, not every dairy farm does those things. So it looks at how much you invest in that preventative or that strategy, and compares it to how much money you may get out by accomplishing it. And the goal is to invest as little as possible and get the most return for your dollar. And so the straight line is your break-even point. It's going to be, I invest X amount of money and I get Y amount back. So it pays for itself. But if you move closer to the left side of the screen, then you're going to be spending less money and potentially making more profit. So you want to be on that other side, that inner side of the straight line, where that curved line is the loss expenditure frontier. So that's kind of the most bang for your buck. And so as close to that line as you can get with those strategies, the best approach for you. Does that make sense? I see some head nodding, so that's good, because it took me like 10 minutes to get my head around the slide well enough to explain it. So the perfect point is certainly where you're going to invest no money and get fantastic milk quality. Now, there aren't a ton of strategies that actually exist on that point, but that's the goal. And so when I talk to farms, I always like to focus on the things that are going to be pretty easy, pretty inexpensive for the dairy farmer, but might actually make a pretty big difference. Cleaning the stalls more frequently. If you employ yourself, if you milk 20 cows in a tie stall, it's an extra 20 minutes of your time. So, when you look at your checkbook, it might not actually cost you anything, but if it prevents an infection every month, that's actually a pretty good break-even point for you. You're making, if a case of mastitis costs $200, you're making that $200 every month. So we kind of went through this, but that X, that's one of the examples, is using dry cow therapy, post-dipping, and doing regular equipment testing. So those are kind of some of the things that, this is a paper, if you wanted to read the paper, looks at. So certainly we already talked about premiums as a potential component of economic loss. Certainly cows might have an increased risk of repeated mastitis. So if she gets mastitis once, you may not just be talking about one $200 case. It might be more expensive than that. Actually, if your cows or the infections that are present on your farm are more likely to result in repeated cases of clinical mastitis. Certain pathogens can behave differently, and so there's certainly some difference to the economic component from case to case based on what pathogen is present in the udder. Treatment costs, you always can see that, but sometimes it's really hard to get your brain around the cost of that milk that's just going down the drain for you. If you have to dump it, if you're not pasteurizing it and feeding it to calves, then that is just money that you are literally pouring down the drain. Culling and death is probably one of the biggest costs. If you have to beef a cow from mastitis, if she gets E. coli and never comes back in milk, you're losing a ton of money, especially if she dies. You don't even get a beef check out of it. That's the ultimate loss. And certainly the other thing that we really don't think about is reduced reproductive performance. If it takes you that much longer to get that cow bred back, she's costing you money for every extra day she's open. So quality premium's certainly going to vary from farm to farm based off of what your co-op's premium levels are and what they pay for premiums. But this is an example of a farm that has a somatic cell count of under 200,000 versus under 250,000. You can see that there's a 20-cent difference in premium, and they end up making, premiums are the green part of the circle, they end up making over $4,000 more just based off of premiums alone, and that is, that's just premiums, and that's only a 50,000 somatic cell count difference for their bulk tank. So if you can do something that helps you achieve that, that's extra $4,000 in your pocket, and that's just for premiums. We also know that for cows that have lower somatic cell counts, they make more milk, and so you're also going to have an increase in volume that you're shipping as well. So milk production losses, as I just kind of started to say, is every time a cow has mastitis, her milk production goes down. And when she recovers, you see it go back up, but sometimes it doesn't always reach the potential that it had before she had mastitis. So not only is she losing milk production at the time of that clinical event, but she's going to have a lower production for the rest of her lactation, so she's going to lose you money for the rest of that lactation. So you can see, we have a lot of research that shows this. You can see it in the graph that the red line is that cow that has clinical mastitis. The green line is the cow that never had clinical mastitis. And you can see when she has that clinical event, her production dips, and it just never goes back to where it should have been. And so she's going to lose you money through the rest of her lactation. She's going to have that milk production loss, that dip, every time she has a clinical event. And so certainly if you're having a lot of repeat mastitis on your farm, if you have maybe Staph aureus or mycoplasma that's not identified and a cow's chronic and keeps flaring up, you're going to keep having these dips, and it's going to cost you money every single time. We can see that the dip is different between first lactation heifers and more mature cows. And this is probably really hard to see with the size of the screens, but each of these lines looks at gram-positive mastitis versus gram-negative mastitis versus a clinical event that has a negative culture. And you can see that the dips are slightly different, but every cow, it's important to keep in mind every cow is going to have a dip. You can see that the first lactation animals truly, really never come back to that original line. The more mature cows come much closer to where they would have been if they didn't have a clinical event, but it's still very costly. Again, multiple events, you're going to get multiple dips, and if you look at the first lactation animals on the left, it really can hit them hard, and you can see that through the rest of their lactation. Again, 3 clinical events, kind of the same thing that you're looking at, and every additional case is going to cost you more money. So certainly when a cow gets mastitis, she's going to potentially be at risk of repeated cases. Every farm that I look at might have a different risk of repeated cases. There's going to be a certain level of repeated cases on every dairy farm. I don't think that any dairy, unless you beef every cow with clinical mastitis, you're always going to see a cow that has a repeat case eventually. She may have a completely new event. If you use Dairy One and get somatic cell count information every month, you might be able to see that after an event you treated her, her somatic cell count goes back down to 100,000. You can safely think that she's probably cured, and 6 months down the road she might get another clinical event and her somatic cell count might go back up. She might get clinical signs of mastitis with abnormal milk. That might be a whole new event, or she may just have her clinical signs subside, her somatic cell count might stay elevated, and a month or 2 months later she might have clinical signs again. That's probably the same infection if her somatic cell count never went away. With repeated episodes of clinical mastitis, we always want to kind of see if maybe there's a reason if they have a high level of it. 35% or less I'm kind of okay with, unless a farm is normally lower than that and has increased for some reason. We can certainly look at what pathogens are present on the farm. Some pathogens are more likely to result in repeated events versus others. We can look at treatment protocols. We can look at what products they're using to treat with, and maybe track some cows or look and see if we can find patterns. Are cows that are having repeated cases, something going on in the treatment pen where maybe we're exposing them to a repeated event? Or do they go into a different group after they've had clinical mastitis? Some farms manage cows that way so that most pens are really clean, and then they have those high somatic cell count cows that maybe are more at risk together. Are we putting them at more risk because we're grouping them together potentially? Are we managing that group differently? But certainly we can go through, this is a graph from Dairy Comp that I can pull up from farms that do test every month and go through. We can see that out of this farm, they milk 1,000 cows. 774 cows never had an event of mastitis. 115 had just one event of mastitis. 74 had 2 events of mastitis. So if we look at it, we know that we can add up all the cows below that 2 line. All those cows had 2 events or more. And so we can say that that number out of the 226 that had 1 event had 2 events. And then, if we're looking at the risk of having 3 events, we know 21 cows had 3 events, 10 cows had 4, 4 had 5 events, 1 had 6 events, and 1 cow had 9 events. Probably want to look at that cow with 9 events and really make sure she didn't belong somewhere else other than the dairy farm. But if we add up those numbers, the 21 and below, all those cows had 3 events or more, and that's out of the 111 cows that had at least 2 events, so that's the risk of having a 3rd event. Does that make sense? I find this is one of the other more work through mentally slides, for me at least, before I've had coffee. So this is another farm where we look at the clinical mastitis over time. The red bars are the first cases of mastitis, and then the other colors are 2nd, 3rd, 4th cases, etc. And you can see that this farm is improving over time. So their repeated cases are getting better. And we can look at that, and they only have 19% of their dairy has 1 event, and then 28% of those with 1 event had a potential 2nd event, and so forth. And so their risk of repeated cases of clinical mastitis is lower than that 35% I looked at. And so not only are, they're reducing their antibiotic use by reducing their cases of repeated mastitis, they're putting more milk into their tank, they're not using as much labor to treat those cows, so this is ending up with money in their pocket. So we can look at specific pathogens and kind of quantify how much specific pathogens cost us in milk loss. And so we can go through, I had 6 slides in here of different pathogens. It's kind of not significant to go through each and every one when we have limited time, but that's the nice thing about having culture results. So that's what we do at QMPS, and we're big proponents of it. So not only are you getting the information of what type of infection is in the udders, so you can make very pathogen-specific treatment decisions, but also you can know what trends are on your herd and what kind of economic impact one pathogen might have over another. It might help you make a decision for managing that specific cow. So this is for Staph aureus, and we can see the left is first calf heifers, the second are mature cows, and we can see that you get that drop at the clinical event, but that milk loss is sustained through the rest of the lactation. And it certainly is much more significant for that first calf heifer compared to the mature cow. So E. coli, you can see the same thing. You get a bigger dip with mature cows compared to the first lactation heifers, but those heifers are really impacted significantly, and you're losing more every day for the rest of the lactation. certainly it's always interesting when you do culture results and you have cows that end up with a negative culture, because you see signs of clinical mastitis. That cow obviously is mounting an immune response to something, but you get a negative culture, and you can see that even that results in a milk loss. Certainly we're big proponents of not treating things that are negative cultures. If we can't grow bacteria, there's not live bacteria there to be killing with antibiotics. The immune system's responding. Sometimes the immune system has already cleared the infection completely anyway, and you're just seeing the residual inflammation as well. But those first calf heifers still impacted through their lactation compared to the more mature cows. So with that, the pathogen patterns are going to be slightly different from types of infections, but really those first lactation animals might be impacted more significantly than mature cows, and it does vary by pathogen. So I didn't put all the pathogens in there, but you can see that there's differences between what we culture and how that impacts the cow. So treatment losses and costs, I think, are one of the most obvious things, because you're writing that bill, you're writing a check for your veterinarian for however many boxes of Spectramaster or Pursue, or you're going to Tractor Supply and buying some today, and that is a very obvious cost to you because you're paying for it right up front. It's not a hidden cost. But other things that you want to keep in mind for treatment is how much time it takes for someone to go through and deal with the treated pen and treat those cows and bucket those cows and put that milk down the drain. The cost of, if you're testing for antibiotic residues on that farm, the time it takes for someone to do that. One of the ways to reduce that cost to your dairy is to do those pathogen-specific treatment protocols, to work with your veterinarian on that. There are some types of infections that we know don't respond to antibiotics, so why should we be putting tubes of antibiotics into that cow's udder when we know it's not going to do anything? And in some cases, in a yeast infection, it might even make it worse. We want to certainly optimize cure rates, so your veterinarian might suggest one antibiotic over another in certain types of infections. And that way, if we can cure a higher percentage of cows, that will be economically beneficial. And if we can get on top of things and treat that cow well in the beginning, we may be able to reduce the amount of time that she's in the treated pen and get her out faster. Or make a smarter decision. If she has something that is contagious that we can't treat, like mycoplasma, maybe she needs to be culled quickly instead of treated. And then that way we're reducing the risk of spreading that infection to other cows in the herd, which is going to save you money. If you're getting rid of a cow early when she had the potential to treat or to spread her infection to 3 or 5 other cows, and you're saving those other cows and reducing the risk for the rest of the herd to get that infection, that saves you money in the end. So different bacteria are going to have different potentials and different for curing and have a higher cure potential than others. Gram-positive streps, we certainly are more likely to treat and be successful at. Staph aureus, it can be variable. We generally work with herd veterinarians to make a treatment protocol so that we can identify those cows that are going to be the most likely to cure. We're going to spend money on antibiotics for Staph aureus. We're going to try to really target those cows that are going to have the highest chance of curing, get the most bang for your buck if you're going to invest in that. Gram-negatives, still very controversial. Just going to say work with your veterinarian on that. There's different opinions out there whether or not to treat, and there are those that don't respond to treatment. So we certainly want to reduce the duration of treating. We want to use the best 5 minutes. Best treatments possible. I'm going to skip through some of this because I want to talk about culling and death really fast, and I want to hit on reproduction. So certainly the ultimate cost is losing that cow in the herd. And so you can see that so this is months, every month after calving, and the probability of that cow leaving the herd by either being sold or dying. And those first 2 months are going to be the highest risk of leaving the herd through death. And so we certainly want to avoid that, because that's going to be the ultimate cost to the dairy farm. It's probably not even the loss of that cow, but probably you're also going to try to treat her. So you're going to put money into treatment and time. So whatever we can do to keep them healthy through those first 2 months is critical. I know that certainly that plays into transition cow management and other management things within the farm, other diseases on the farm. But that risk is also higher. So that first graph was first lactation animals, and the second graph is for mature cows. And you can see that for mature cows, that probability of being sold extends into her entire lactation, and it stays pretty high for the rest of her lactation. And so these are cows that you've already you've had them for a lactation, you've had them for a while. Let's keep them maybe to a third lactation. They're probably producing more milk than those first calf heifers are. So the other thing, and I certainly want to touch on this because I think it's the one thing we really don't even think about very much, is the impact on reproduction. So there are some papers out there that really show that if a cow gets mastitis early in her lactation, so probably before she's inseminated for the first time or before she's even preg checked, you're going to have an increase in services per conception, increases in days until confirmed conception. And that's because her body is mounting an inflammatory response. And a lot of those inflammatory agents are not just focused on her mammary gland, but they end up circulating in her bloodstream, and they're going to impact her reproductive tract as well. And so if you do inseminate her, she's going to be less likely to settle from that, because her body is just not in a place where she can focus her energies on her reproductive performance. And so if you're putting semen into her, it might be a waste of semen. She's going to potentially be open longer. Every day that she's open past that initial about 150 days is going to cost you money, because down the road, if she's 400 days in milk and her production's 30 pounds and you're not ready to dry her off yet, she's costing you money to feed her while she's still in the milking herd. So she's costing you money until you can dry her off and get that calf out of her for the next lactation. So, and those issues of reduced reproductive performance are not just for cows with clinical mastitis. Cows with subclinical mastitis, even though their milk is normal, they're still mounting an inflammatory response. You're just not seeing it. And so those issues with reduced conception are going to still be true. So certainly milk quality premium losses are something that's easy to see because you're not getting it, but you know that there's that potential in your milk check. It's a great place where you can see instant cash in your pocket if you can start to achieve those premiums from your co-op. If you are able to reduce your risks of repeated cases, you're saving money on treatment. If you start to do culture work, QMPS is, or your veterinarian, there are a lot of veterinarians that do culture cows with clinical mastitis. If you can start to work with a group, whether it be us or your veterinarian, to start to get pathogen-specific results, you're going to potentially reduce the amount of money you're spending on treatments. You're going to be able to make better management decisions for every cow because you know what she has. We talked about treatment. Certainly, if we can reduce the risk of cows leaving the herd due to mastitis, if you're looking to grow cow numbers, that's going to really help. And hopefully, if we can get cows bred back when we want to so that they can stay profitable, we can dry them off before they're losing us money, they can calf back in at a good time for good calving intervals, and that'll save you money. How many minutes do I have? Okay, are there questions, or do I want to do a quick couple examples? Okay. So when I work with farms, we really rely heavily on dairy comp records or other records on the farm. So I always want to look at the whole picture for a cow and the whole picture for a farm. What are their goals? Are they managing just for milk quality, or are there other challenges that we want to take into consideration? What I always think an important number to have is, what is their break-even point for production? Because if a cow's making less money or less milk than that, then we definitely want to take that into consideration. I look at the types of infections that are present, what lactation that cow is, days in milk, and her reproductive status. Different options that you have. So when I go through things on a cow-by-cow basis for a farm, if they have a small enough herd that we can do that, then we look at whether or not we should culture that cow because it's an infection that we weren't aware of yet, so we haven't cultured it. Maybe we can dry that cow off early. Do we make her do not breed because we want to cull her at some point? And it's easier to cull cows that are open than are pregnant. Maybe she's an obvious cull candidate. Certainly she might be a milk last candidate, and we can lump our problem cows together so that we can keep the rest of the herd at a lower risk of getting contagious infections. So this is an example. I don't know if you can see that really well. Can you see that? So this cow, she's in her 4th lactation. She's making 67 pounds of milk. She has a somatic cell count of just over 5 million. We know that she cultured with C and DAIRYPROFIT staph species. We know the farm decided to treat her with Today. She has had a somatic cell count that's been creeping up through this lactation, and when I look back at her last lactation, she's had a somatic cell count that's been elevated for the majority of her last lactation. So she was a cow that the farm ended up deciding to sell. She wasn't making enough milk that, she was only 3 months in. She wasn't making enough that they thought that they could get the rest of the lactation out of her. They suspected that she may have had a problem from the previous infection that may not have really resolved in the dry period, since she calved in with a higher somatic cell count than we wanted. So for them, she was a cull decision. This is a cow that, so her somatic cell count's not terrible. It's 283,000. I use 200,000 as my cutoff when I'm looking at problem cows. But you can see that she cultured with yeast, so we knew not to treat her, so we didn't waste money putting antibiotics into her. And actually her somatic cell count, if I look at the entire lactation, she was just high for her first couple of test days, and that's actually where we made the decision to make her do not breed. She was a 3rd lactation animal. The farm just made that decision. They didn't want to keep investing in her, especially after a couple of months of a high somatic cell count at the beginning of the lactation. Her somatic cell count did come down though, but by the time we were kind of reaching the end of her lactation, she was making about 40 pounds of milk, and that's when they decided to cull her. She certainly might have been a cow that if they had bred her back, she might have been okay. Her somatic cell count did come down, but she was an older cow. We knew her risk of curing might be slightly less because she was older, and they didn't want to be stuck with her for another lactation if her somatic cell count didn't come down. So this is another cow so we knew she had C is staph species, S is strep species, and those culture results correlate with, she had a somatic cell count of about 500,000, which came down and then came back up to 700,000. They didn't actually, they didn't record a treatment, but I was able to go through my notes and their treatment records, because they don't put everything in DairyComp, and they did treat her. And so they just treated her actually a little bit later in time, because this was, they were kind of trying to manage their treatment group. They didn't have room for her quite yet. But this is a cow where her somatic cell count completely resolved after treatment, and she was a 1st lactation heifer. She was pregnant with a heifer, so they were able to dry her off. She ended up having another lactation where she did really well. And so it's one of those, I like to use the whole picture. I always sit down with the farm, because certainly sometimes when I make recommendations, they don't always, that's not always the decision that the farm ends up making. Sometimes I'm say, okay, well, let's treat her. She looks like a good treatment candidate. And they say, oh, she's mean. I don't want her. Or, oh, she has this abscess on her. I don't really want her. Something else is going on that I don't know about. Or there are times where, to me, she's a big, cull candidate, but, she's a favorite cow in the herd, and they're willing to invest a little bit more money than I might necessarily invest in. Okay, that's probably a good place to stop and pass it on to Rick. I have another case. I have a specific